So welcome everyone to the April 10th Sacramento Valley Chapter CNPS meeting. It is a pleasure this evening to introduce to you Julia Michaels and Joshua Scoggin of Hedgerow Farms. They're going to be speaking to us this evening about tending the wild world of farming California native plants for restoration. As we all know that there are a lot of projects in Sacramento and throughout the state, a lot of dam removals, agricultural land repurposing, and there's a lot of demand for seed to restore these large tracts of land. So I'm going to go ahead and hand this over to Julia and to Joshua, and really looking forward to your presentation this evening. So I'll let you share your screen.
All right, thank you so much for that introduction. Just give me one moment while I get this started. Apologies for the title. It's not Davis Science Cafe, it is CNPS, but I did do one. It was really fun. I just wanted to thank everyone at the CNPS for being here. When I was a grad student at UC Davis doing my research, a lot of my scholarships came from CNPS funds. So, it's an organization that's really near and dear to my heart. So my name is Julia Michaels, and I'm the restoration ecologist at Hedgerow Farms, and I'm joined by Joshua Scoggin, who is our associate ecologist. And we both work at Hedgerow Farms. We're both very excited to talk with you. I think for the purpose of just organizing this talk, I'm going to go first and give you sort of an overview of what we do, skipping over some of the basics that I'm certain that you're familiar with, and then, take questions, pressing questions if we have any, and then we'll move into Joshua's section. So Joshua is actually involved with the physical collection of seeds, and is an incredible film photographer. So one of the things that I'm really excited about is him getting to share his photos from his experience doing seed collection last summer with our crew. I wish I could see you all, but usually I ask how many of you have ever been out to Hedgerow Farms before? Maybe put it in the chat if you've been to Hedgerow Farms before. And maybe even some of you came to our field day, which was last Friday. We had 180 people out at the farm, which was quite the event. And it was really, really cool to see so many familiar faces, but also so many new faces. So for those of you who are not familiar with Hedgerow Farms, we are located in Winters, and we're right nestled up against the hills near the Berryessa Gap. And we've been around since the 1980s. We have 300 acres of native wild flowers and grasses, mostly perennial bunch grasses and perennial and annual wildflowers. And our fields, which stretch about a mile from north to south, are flanked by native hedgerows, and those were planted at the founding of the farm. So some of our hedgerows are 40 years old, some of the oldest native hedgerows, probably in the state. Our farm was founded by John Anderson, who was a veterinarian at UC Davis, and he really started this as a passion project, going out into the surrounding hills, collecting small amounts of seed, and then experimenting with whether or not you could grow that seed as a crop to produce, more for restoration. So this is a photo of John Anderson, and sort of alongside Hedgerow Farms, the California Native Grasslands Association grew up and, became an important sort of advocate for the conservation of native grasses and the wildflowers that grow in grasslands. And so we have this annual field day, which just happened last Friday, and it was the 16th annual. So my background is in academia. I was actually teaching restoration ecology at Sacramento State, and then at Reed College up in Oregon, hence the Howell's Books mug. And what I love about this job is, it's kind of academic-ish, right? So I still get to do research. I still get to do outreach and talks and think about science, but I also get to do a lot more stuff that I didn't get to do when I was teaching. And so, on any given day, Joshua and I are out doing a field visit, helping a land manager decide, troubleshoot with one of their restoration projects, or giving a talk, or helping conduct some research, or, managing our endless inventory spreadsheet. So, it's a quite variable and fun position, and I'm sure Joshua can talk a little bit more about his experience with it. Before we get started, I just wanted to tell you about something you might not know, which is that Hedgerow Farms is part of a larger group of native seed companies called the Native Seed Group. And this is a new change. So only in the last year, we became part of this group of commonly owned native seed companies, including Pacific Coast Seed and S&S Seed. Those represent our California companies. And we share inventory and resources, like cleaning resources and HR and things like that, so that we can all focus more specifically on the regions that we serve. So, we're in the Central Valley, Pacific Coast Seed is more close to the Bay Area, and then S&S Seed is down in Santa Barbara, serving more of Southern California. But we're able to, focus on staying local while, sharing a lot of the resources that we need to stay afloat as well. So if you're interested in the Native Seed Group, that's on our website. So amongst our 3 companies in the Native Seed Group, we actually have 750 acres in production. So our 300-acre farm up north plus a 450-acre farm down in Los Alamos. We have about 400 native California species available in our inventory. And if you actually went into our warehouse and counted, and I did try to do this from a spreadsheet, we have about 1.7 million pounds of native seed in storage. A lot of that has to do with big bulk amounts of native grasses that are used in restoration and reclamation projects. So they're not, your rare forb species. A lot of them are like Bromus carinatus, Elmus glaucus, Elmus triticioides. But what is cool is that 90% of that seed in our warehouse, we can point exactly on a map to where we originally collected it from, which I'm sure you all are aware of is an important component of growing native seed. So 90% of our seed is of known genetic origin. I'm not going to ask you guys what a native seed is because I know you know. I simplify it usually by just telling people it's the seed of a plant that's evolutionarily adapted to a particular place. I'm sure that you might even have a better definition than mine. But of course, I like to mention that native can be complicated, right? So there are some species that are native in some parts of California and have been considered invasive in other parts. Lupinus arboreus is an example. So in southern coastal environments, south of Point Reyes, more or less, it's native, and then north, it's quite a problematic species. So it's never as easy as native, non-native. Who uses native seed? Well, you all do, but so do contractors doing erosion control and post-fire restoration, dam removal. A huge amount of our work has gone into providing seed for the Klamath dam removal. So, there are people applying native seed by hand, by drill seeder, by hydro seeding, which is that guy spraying the green thing in the middle, even by helicopter. And then, of course, there's sort of what we're more familiar with, just sort of, small scale restoration plantings as well. Oh, and then my favorite guy, this is this guy Shalako in San Francisco who goes around in a bee costume and shakes native seeds all over the medians. But I'm always on his case because he's wearing a European honeybee costume. And I'm like, get yourself a native bee costume. Anyway, okay, why do we need to plant native seed? Well, in some places we don't. So I actually learned this from the CNPS, the difference between active and passive restoration. So I learned that, sorry, is my husband locked out? Okay, my husband's locked up, but that's okay. He can wait until I'm done with this. I learned that in some areas, you basically don't need to put native seed on the ground because there's a healthy seed bank where, basically if you remove the disturbance, the population will come back. An example of that was a few years ago, like around Folsom Lake, when the lake started to recede, there were these huge blooms of lupins. And so, we didn't plant those lupins. They were just there waiting in the seed bank for the right time to emerge. So I don't know, maybe not the best example, but that's kind of an idea that, don't necessarily always need to put seed on the ground. But in other situations, there's very little native seed left in the seed bank. So, for example, in many of our upland habitats where, the combination of restricting indigenous burning practices and overgrazing and introducing, Spanish agricultural species like Avena and, some of those sort of old world invasives have really changed our grasslands to an annual system. And so there's very little native seed left in that seed bank. And so, I really like Laura Cunningham's book called The State of Change, where she tries to imagine what our grasslands looked like prior to the Spanish coming over in the 1700s, and imagining that we had more bunch grasses in the native seed bank is something that I think we've all sort of bought into. And it's a little unclear what exactly our grasslands looked like prior to colonization. But we do sort of agree that we need to be putting seed on the ground if we want to get them back to a more native state. Another time you would need to plant native seed is if there's a fire that's so catastrophic that it actually burns and sterilizes the seed bank so that there really isn't anything left to come back. So obviously with climate change, that type of fire is increasing and causing erosion. And of course, native bunch grasses have much deeper root systems than our annuals. So on the right, on your left, I guess, that's our native bunch grass with its deep fibrous root system. And on the other side is the annuals that just don't have that same water holding capacity or erosion control qualities. So, you might be able to guess it, do we have enough native seed to restore ecosystems? Not if we're going to be as sort of aggressive and ambitious with our ecosystem restoration goals that we have in California. So a lot of information, a lot of news in the last year has come out talking about our insufficient supply of native seed for restoration. And this big National Academies of Science paper came out by Susan Harrison from UC Davis was the lead scientist that really assessed the native seed needs and the capacity for the supply, and kind of decided that if we're going to go full speed on this restoration work, we're going to need a lot more seed. Especially with this 30 by 30 goal that California has to restore or conserve 30% of its ecosystems, land and ocean by 2030. So how do we get enough native seed to restore our ecosystems? I put this picture of a California condor because it occurred to me the other day that basically what we're doing at Hedgerow Farms is the same as what we're doing with other populations of other taxa. We're kind of a captive breeding program for plants. We're taking plants from the wild, we're breeding them, but trying to maintain their genetic integrity and then releasing them back into the wild. So we're really not trying to domesticate them. We're trying to maintain that ecological adaptation that those plants have. So we don't want to get too involved in their lives before we sort of re-release them into the wild. Take it or leave it. I don't know if it's the best metaphor, but so it starts with step one, which is finding populations of native plants in the wild and collecting a small amount. That's where Joshua comes in, and he's going to talk a lot more about that when I'm done. But it can be really tricky, right? You have to find a large enough population to collect from. You have to get all the permissions ahead of time, which is a whole ordeal. You have to go early enough that the seed hasn't dropped to the ground, but not so early that, see that picture in the corner there, the seed hasn't really developed yet. So sometimes you you drive 5 hours and the seed isn't ready. Sometimes you drive 5 hours to get it and it's already dropped. And we collect seed from as far south as Bakersfield and as far north as Humboldt. So we do a lot of driving to get this seed. And it's a really rewarding process. Our seed collectors have been working for decades, and they are, very proud of the work that they do. And they are some of the best botanists, that I've ever worked with. Again, I won't talk too much about this because Joshua is going to cover it. And they work really hard. Sorry, I'm stealing some of your photos, Joshua, but this is just an example of, we don't just sort of pluck individual seeds, we often cut seed heads, which adds up to a lot of weight. So that, physical labor of collecting enough seed to plant a field is pretty exhausting. Just a couple more of Joshua's photos, but I'm not going to go too late. Okay. So, now we've got our small amount of seed that we've collected from the wild. The next thing we do is we plant it at the farm using traditional agricultural equipment. So we have drill seeders, and we use combines and threshers. But we also use non-traditional or indigenous methods as well. We burn our bunch grasses to try and improve our seed production so that we can leave them in the field for longer. So, our long-lived bunch grasses like Stipropulchra can stay in our field for 6 or 7 years or longer, but we have to keep refreshing them by removing the thatch and encouraging them to keep regenerating their seed. And it's really beautiful. And, as we mentioned already, this is the perfect time of year to come see. We literally have a field of Ciceranchium bellum like this right now. So at the end of this talk, I'll leave my email, and you're welcome to come out and see our forbs in bloom. It's just really good for the soul, I think. And unlike a super bloom that in a natural area where you can't walk in it, we have rows. So you can walk down a row of native plants without having to worry about smushing them. I just wanted to mention also this step, our farm workers are really important. So it's not just the seed collectors, it's the people who tend to the seed in the field, and they have also been doing it for 20, 30 years. And they know all the different tips and tricks for how to grow these, basically wild plants. Okay, so now we've grown a field. It's time to harvest. We usually use a combine, which kind of chops the plant. Either if it's perennial, it'll chop the plant and leave the rest of it growing, the root system, so it can come back. Or if it's an annual, we'll chop it and then eventually we'll have to till it again. So we harvest the field and we have to clean the seed. And cleaning the seed is another set of challenges, because you guys have all probably worked with California native seed. So you know that some seed is really small, like mugwort, where if you breathe on it, it blows away. Some seed is, spiky, like Stipropulchra or Hordeum. Some of it is nice and round. We love the round seed like lupin or bladderpod because it behaves. It flows through our machinery nice and easy, doesn't get stuck. But, we have lots of different shapes and sizes that we're cleaning. And we do that using, large traditional seed cleaning equipment that is originally meant for barley and corn and things like that. But we use a combination of different size screens and different speeds, and every single one of the species that we clean has a different setting that we've learned through trial and error over the last 35 years of operation. We also have some fun byproducts like this milkweed fluff. We end up with mountains of milkweed fluff after we harvest the seed. So one of the things I like doing is trying to find creative ways to divert some of our byproduct from the waste stream. And I don't know if you guys know this, but milkweed floss is actually used as an insulation. It's vegan and it's really warm. And I know somebody in Nebraska who is working on making, oh gosh, can you see it? Making jackets out of milkweed floss, and they have started sewing vests with them. So we might start providing our milkweed to them to make jackets, which would be cool. Very, very warm. Yeah, milkweed. Okay, so then we have to, after we clean the seed, we store it in our warehouse. Back to that huge number of pounds of seed we have in our warehouse. We have 40,000 square feet of storage in the state of California. And so, big warehouses, temperature controlled-ish, humidity controlled-ish. We keep it as good as we can within a certain range, but ultimately we're trying to move the seed quickly so that its germination rate is as high as possible. And we do have to test every single lot of seed that we collect or grow every single year by California law. So there's an entire staff just devoted to sampling and testing the seed and making sure that it's legal to sell it. And then, of course, the fun part, now we've got all this seed and all these clients come to us and they want seed mixes and we get to help them design it, right? Sometimes a client comes and they know exactly what they want. which is fun too, to see what they've come up with. But I really enjoy, when someone comes and says, what's the best seed mix for my project? And I get to help them. I'm always balancing, availability and cost with other project goals. So, we have some like pretty standard mixes. This is like pretty boring mix, I would say, but it works well. These are what I'd call like our workhorse species. So Bromus carinatus, Elymus glaucus, those are two sort of, uh, great performers in the beginning of a seed mix. So you have to think about how's it going to perform the first year you plant it, and then over time you're kind of like programming an ecosystem. So the Fuchsia microstachius is an annual, so that's kind of, it acts almost like a little cover crop to hold space against invasives. The lupin and the trifolium are great for fixing some nitrogen. The stipopulchra is going to take a while to establish, but eventually will come in and hold space. And then of course, yarrow is just a nice hardy pollinator plant as well. So again, this is not like the ideal seed mix in terms of ecological goals, but it is a very realistic and I would say robust enough mix. Of course, I much prefer ones that have lots of pollinator plants. So this is actually one that Jessa Cruz developed recently with Xerxes, and it has, something blooming for every season. And we sell a lot of this mix. It's very popular in, home gardens and hedgerows on farms. So I think it's a little more expensive, but it's, got a lot more ecological value to pollinators. Okay, but there's more. So I mentioned the importance of, remembering where your seed came from when where you collected it from originally. And that's because, diversity doesn't stop at the species level. And you all know that. There's a lot of genetic diversity within a given species. A California poppy that grew up in Southern California is going to have a different set of genetics than a California poppy that grew up in Northern California. And we're finding more and more that this local ecotype component is actually one of the keys to these plants performing well in the wild. So, as a seed farm, it's very important for us to take that into consideration. So again, a definition of a local ecotype is a subset of a species that's adapted to a specific environment that's evolved to be genetically distinct from populations of the same species found in different environments. I'm not going to test you on that definition later, but there it is. Okay, so why does this matter? Well, local ecotypes can differ from one another in things like morphology, so like how tall they are, phenology, when they bloom, that can be huge if you're trying to be supporting pollinators. Ploidy, that's a genetics term that I'm not going to get into. But we've noticed at the farm different morphological, that's the most easy, and phenological qualities of different ecotypes of the same species growing at our farm. So, this is especially important because we collect between our company and S&S Seeds down south, we collect all across the state, and we have multiple ecotypes for every species that we either grow or collect. So, for example, we have 32, individual collections of Stipopulchra, 13 of miniature lupin, 7 of California goldfields, and it goes on and on. You can go to our website if you're interested in seeing all of our different ecotypes. But the challenge of that is that you have to genetically isolate them at the farm, right? If we grow our two, northern and southern varietal right next to each other, they're going to start to hybridize, especially, if that is what their breeding characteristics are. So obviously wind pollinated versus insect pollinated plays a difference, or selfing too. So we do have some guidance on genetic isolation at the farm, how far our fields have to be from one another in order to, consider them non-breeding. So luckily our farm is a mile from north to south, so we are able to put some distance between our ecotypes, which is a very fortunate component of our farm. We also work with the California Crop Improvement Association, which is located on UC Davis campus. They have set standards for how far away fields have to be from one another, and other things about weed content, germination, how much inert matter can be in the seed. And so we can get our seed certified by the California Crop Improvement Association. And that's a program that we're actively working on trying to improve. Here's another beautiful drone shot of our farm from last year. Here's a cool thing. That yellow strip is some Lysthenia that I believe that was one that, we had just collected from, maybe it was in San Mateo. And so that's a first year field. And you can see how it's not as sort of thick and robust as some of our others. We were able to stretch a very small amount of seed to plant that field. But from that field, we ended up getting about 250 pounds of seed. So now if we wanted to plant it again, we could then have, much more robust fields or larger ones. Yeah, Xerxes is cool. I don't know why this is in here. Butterflies are cool. I bet you can tell whether this is a male or a female by the spot on its wing. So in the summer, we have Asclepias speciosa and Asclepias fascicularis growing at our farm, and it's really, really beautiful to see. We actually also sell the rhizomes of Asclepias speciosa. So you can actually dig up the rhizomes, and then you've got a whole bunch of energy storage underground from the rhizomes. They grow much more reliably than planting plugs. So it's something we're, working with to try and get used more commonly in restoration projects. Okay, the other thing besides genetic isolation is that if we start growing these species and harvesting them and then planting them again and again, we might start to lose those wild genetics. And so that's something we're very concerned about too. And that many people who are thinking about native seed are thinking about. So how many generations can you grow a crop for before it starts to get domesticated? There's very little research on this, but there is some coming out. This is from a recent study that came out of University of Münster in Germany, where they were trying to see, looking at, I think it was 19 different perennial species, how many generations it took before these sort of natural populations started to show signs of domestication. And they found that, over just a few generations, I think it was 5 generations, there was a reduction in variation amongst the populations. So the plants became more similar to one another. The natural variation that existed in those populations started to narrow as the as the generation increased. So they had more similar biomass, more similar number of flowers, and they started all flowering around the same time too. So this is just, one small study, but they're working on doing more studies like this in California. And of course, you all know that it's very species dependent. So if it's a long-lived perennial, 10 years could be just 1 or 2 generations. If it's Lysthenia, 10 years would be 10 generations. So what did we do about it? We participate in that research. We, as a native seed farm, can actually lead that research because we have access to all this seed and all these collection sites. So we're actively working with professors at several different universities to try and come up with these types of studies for California native plants. And also, we can also recollect our species. So, we have the foundational species that we use to plant the fields over and over again, but we can go out and try and refresh the genetics every year by going out and recollecting some of our species so that we never get to that G10 where we're concerned about it. Yeah, so that's all I've got. This is just the QR code link to our website and also my email. And again, the offer stands if anyone wants to come out to the farm in the next few weeks and see the beautiful blooming fields, just shoot me an email. I'd be happy to arrange that for you. So I figured we could pause for 5 minutes and take some questions before Joshua does his part. Does that sound okay? Okay.
Yeah, that sounds good, Julia. I can I can read the questions. We have a few in our Q&A.
Mhm.
How can or should we collect native seeds in our own yards to share in a responsible and organized way?
I think that collecting seeds in your own yard is the most responsible thing you can do. I mean, it's, your property, you're not depleting it for anyone else who might be using it for any other indigenous purposes or whatever purposes, right? But at the same time, you also don't want to, maybe if it's in your own yard, I would focus on actually collecting the seeds, but leaving the seed heads, because we know that native bees tend to nest in the hollow stems and stems of plants. So maybe you wouldn't necessarily use the same techniques that we do when we're collecting large quantities. You can be a little more picky and leave more of that plant material for some of the pollinators. Just a thought. Maybe someone else has another thought about that.
So we have another question. We actually have a couple. What California law requires that the seed be tested every year?
Oh gosh, I could make up a AB 174. No, I don't know. I have no idea what law it is. It is a law that somebody told me is, and I'm sure we could look it up, but all seed that is sold for money in California has to be tested for germination rate, for purity. So that's like, are there sticks and dirt, but also other crop seed, weed seed, and then noxious weeds. And noxious weeds, what the state or federal government defines as noxious might not be what we in the restoration community think of as noxious. For example, in California, Bromus tectorum cheatgrass is not a technically noxious weed, which is nuts to me. But we would, we're very careful about that. We learned the hard way because folks who weren't botanists were helping out with inventory and they didn't catch it, but now we're very, very careful about never distributing anything with what we consider a noxious weed, even if it's not legally noxious.
That is so important. What is the difference between an ecotype and a subspecies? I think this is a really great question.
I mean, I think an ecotype really has to do with a specific region that a plant has adapted to. Like an ecotype usually has a geographic component to it. So there's like, for example, Festuca rubra, Melody. There's like a very specific population of Festuca rubra that grows in a specific morphological distinctive way from this one area. And I honestly don't know. Yeah, I bet there's somebody in this meeting who would have a better definition than me. But yeah, when I think of sorry, I just would, my follow-up is when I think of an ecotype, I think of a geographically distinct population. And when I think of a subspecies, I think more of a like genetically distinct subpopulation. Oh gosh.
I think that's a really good answer. And I think that that's also a really important point, and to that Hedgerow is very cognizant of and has been since its beginnings as a seed amplification farm, is that they've been very aware to collect from different eco regions because there are those differences. That is so important to maintain the genetic diversity of the plants in the state of California. We have one more question, so I'm gonna keep my commentary brief. There are actually two. When you collect new seeds to add to the seed you have grown, do you mix them together when you plant?
That's a great question. So no, we keep all of our lots totally separate. When we grow a field, we grow it generally from just one lot. That's because every lot has a slightly different set of, germination rate. And of course you clean it down as much as you possibly can, but there's always going to be a little bit of off-type species in there. So we don't generally mix lots. We keep them separate. It just makes our lives easier.
Actually, I teased two more questions.
Okay.
How do you recommend growing out seed at a small scale? Would you grow in pots for a year or would you broadcast in the fall?
I would first of all say if you're interested in growing plants for seed and you've never done it before, start with annual orbs like annual wildflowers. It's the fastest, like a lot of the bunch grasses and things, they don't even start producing seed till their second or third year. So, if you're starting out, I would say I would recommend starting with the annual wildflower. Um, you can do it in pots, for sure. Broadcasting seed in the fall is also really good. I wouldn't say that pots are generally smaller than areas you can broadcast, so you're going to get more plants if you broadcast, probably. But yeah, in the fall is a great time to do it. Of course, the number one question I get is when to plant seeds, and the answer is right before a 5 to 7 day period of consistent moisture in the soil. And it's like, well, I don't see that on the weather report. So it's really about, when you plant sometime between, mid-September and early February, which I think is still pretty late to plant, can you at least create through watering the conditions that the seed needs to germinate, which is, consistent moisture in the top quarter inch for, first couple weeks.
Okay, one more. For home gardeners, is there value in collecting seed from cultivars? Would that introduce more genetic variation than vegetative propagation?
Well, yeah, I mean, if you grow things from seed, you're going to get more genetic variation than vegetative propagation. I think as long as you're keeping it in your garden, yeah, absolutely. We just don't want cultivars to get out into wildlands and cause issues. So, yeah, there's value in collecting seed from cultivars. But just make sure you're not like right up against some wildland area where it could start spreading easily.
I
Okay,
think that's a really great point. And with that, I think we've made it through the questions.
so
So I will turn this over to Joshua now.
Hello, yes. My name is Joshua Scoggin. I am the associate ecologist at Hedgerow Farms. It's gonna be interesting because I can only see myself, but I don't know if if you're bored or not. But I think I just show some pictures of last year's season and kind of talk through the experience that we have. A lot of people have questions about seed collection, so I guess I'll talk a little bit about that. So I'll try and share my screen. Um, okay. Can you see that?
yes, we can see it.
Okay, sorry. Okay, so this is gonna be a mixture of some pictures, pictures from the farm and pictures that we took out in the wild and several pictures about different stages of the process. And also some pictures that I took when I was out there because California is very beautiful. But so we can begin here, like Julie was saying, a lot of the seed that we collect comes from the wild. And the process of finding the seed is, pretty complex. Because it's you don't I think for me, something that I learned is that you can't really understand the process until you've lived for a whole season, because people will talk about different parts of the season and they'll say, well, this comes later, this comes later. You kind of get it logically. Um, but at the same time, once you live it, you understand the importance of, every step. So I'll begin with we can talk with this pretty picture. So the season begins with a scouting process. We receive a list of species that are important for the upcoming season, and usually these are determined by what's good in the market and what sells well and what kind of ecological trends we can see. And so we have or you know, species that we need to renew genetically, you know, species that maybe we had for a long time, but we need to renew so that they don't lose the wild factor. So the season begins by a lot of driving around trying to find these species in nature. This one is an example. We were looking for house clover, Castellea exerta, and you can see it here on the bottom. So you know, you drive around, you see a very beautiful purple hill, and you know, this is at the farm, but it's a lupin field. So this is another example of a wildland area. This is done in Bakersfield. So you go down there, you find it, and then you gotta figure out who owns the property, because you can't really trespass. So we use different methods to find who owns property and contact landowners and ask for permission. And that permission looks different depending on who you ask. Sometimes you can ask a governmental entity and they will say, well, you need to fill out this form, you need to you know, meet certain requirements. Sometimes the permission is talking to a rancher or a farmer and just kind of discussing what's a good deal for both of us and trying to live up. So yeah, like you can see, it's a kind of a diverse area. California is a very diverse state, biologically, geographically, and everything else. So the crew is kind of seeing everything in terms of you know, we collect seeds in the desert, we collect seeds in the close to the ocean and in the high altitude. Yeah, there's something else Julia was mentioning earlier about how the expertise of the whole things that we do in the farm kind of translates onto restoration. So we know that when we, for example, this was a site visit we were doing up in the Knoxville wildlife area. And since it was a collections contract, the collection specialist, that the botanist kind of behind the seed collection activities, come with us to the site and can provide land managers with, you know, opinions about how to plant, where to plant, and such other things. So some more pictures at the farm. So this one is actually funny because I took this picture early January last year because the office wanted us to collect coyote bush, which is an interesting species because it also can be invasive in some areas of the state, but it's very beneficial in other areas because it's very good with erosion control and other things. But anyway, we went out in early January, but it was too late to collect the species because the rain had, you know, has little feathers on it, so it all was all on the ground. So we kept it on the list and we returned the following year. So there's a lot of also patience and a lot of flexibility that everybody needs to have. You know, the people who are more on the business side have to understand that just because it's on the list, you're not gonna get it. There's a certain kind of risk factor to it. But yeah, some more landscapes of different areas. This is the field that Julia was talking about on the farm, and you can see that there's also different species that grow alongside because of previous crops. So interesting how you define a weed. You know, sometimes for us a weed, it's just an undesirable plant. It is, even if it's native. And here are some of the pictures of the farm workers laboring in the hot sun. And I think this is kind of something that goes a little bit, you know, people don't really think about it too much, how difficult this work is, and how valuable the people who do the work are. Anyone can collect seed. Anyone, you know, you want to grow it in your garden, you can collect it. But when you want to collect seed at a quantity that is economically feasible, you need people who not only know how to identify the seed and how to, you know, look for it, but also people who know how to collect it very, very quickly. I always tell this, but even when I was out there collecting, is my first year working here, so I would go out with the guys they've been here for like, you know, 20-30 years. They can collect faster than I can, even if I'm trying like my hardest. If I'm trying my hardest, they're relaxed, they can collect so much more quantity and quality of the seed. So this is some more pictures. This is a picture of us collecting the house clover that I mentioned previously. This is a hand collection. There's many ways that we collect seed depending on, you know, the landowner's preferences. sometimes the landowner says, we talked to a guy that grows almonds one time, and he said, I'm gonna spray this minus lettuce, so you better do it quick. So we go out with take the machines and we just take it out. But some people say, no, you have to be very careful here, take just a few seeds, whatever. So we have to also be very, very flexible on how we the deals we have with landowners and how we approach seed collection. Some more pictures. This is talk about the season. After we collect, everything needs to be cleaned. So look at the process of the cleaning, the machines we have at the farm. Here there's a barn inside. I don't really have a picture of the machines. We have very big industrial side level machines, but some of the seed needs special treatment. So we still have to use smaller chippers. And with that comes a lot of creativity in terms of how you do it. So yeah, some more pictures of different sites. Here's a picture of the combine used to process some machines. So we have large quantities. We can use the larger equipment. And I don't want to run too out of time. I don't know if we still have time to look at more pictures.
You got a little more time, Joshua.
Okay, so yeah, I mean, I'll just go through these, but you can see the diversity. And okay, here's a mill. Here's the yarrow fields. Yeah, so desert, flat areas, but also oh, I saw a question in the Q&A about irrigation. So I don't know if this is any good, but they don't put the irrigation underground because because we rotate our crops very frequently. We don't like to, if you grow a field of lupin one year, you can't really grow a field of Lastenia the next year on the same field because the weed control is going to be very difficult. So they have to rotate their crops a lot between grasses and forbs, and so the irrigation is usually done with the big wheels. I don't know what they call them, above ground. I don't know if that's a smart answer, but as is. Here's more pictures of the agriculture side of things, and this is Alejandro lifting a very heavy bag of Cecilia. So for example, here we had permission to go out with our lawnmowers, it's like garden lawnmowers, and collect everything. So we go out, and sometimes when we need to amplify the seed, we'll collect a small amount to bring back to the farm. But sometimes when we have the opportunity, we'll collect large quantities as well. Because some of these people in this property, they will mow it anyway. So it's good for us to take it, and then we can put it somewhere where someone's gonna take care of the plants. Some Aragonum and Humboldt. Some more flowers at the garden, at the farm. That's a collection in Colusa County. More pictures. Oh, this is a nice picture. Humboldt. So yeah, I'll just you tell me when I'm done, but the different aspects of the collection and farm work. Here's Jeff, is our farm manager working with Juan, who helps with planting and with cleaning. This is us, the guys doing the scouting process in the beginning of the year. Some more scouting that we're doing in Bakersfield. So there's a before the pre-planting. Poppies. And this is the irrigation setup, if you were interested in looking at it. We have a lot of different weather conditions, as you can probably tell. And the guys, they know very well, when to begin working, when to stop working. And not only because of, you have to be careful with the heat and stuff, but also because, for example, some of the seed likes to, in the morning with the dew, it sticks to the plant easier. So you need to be out there very early to begin the collection, because if you go in the later afternoon, like for example, the California aster, in the afternoon with the heat, it opens up and it blows away. So you can't shake it. But in the morning, it stays inside, so you can collect it very easy, and you can retain, a lot of the seed. So I think that's it for the pictures, at least. I see there's some more questions, but I think I'll end it there. I don't know if people want to ask stuff about the process.
Joshua, those are fantastic photos. The fact that those are all film is very exciting. That's not an art, but is regularly practiced, and your photos really have a depth to them that we just don't get you know, in the digital age. I know I'm guilty of snapping a lot of photos with my iPhone, but they're just not quite as beautiful or as I'm going to say charismatic as your photos. So thank you for sharing that with us, and thank you for still practicing that craft. It's quite lovely. We do have a couple more questions in the chat. When you find the seed, how do you assess that it is viable and it's an appropriate time to harvest?
Yeah, so that's a good question. It's just a lot of work. I mean, in the farm, it's easy because Jeff can drive around and look at the fields every day. But that's when the knowledge comes in, and Alejandro, Manolo, and Carlos, the seed collection crew, they will say this species will be ready in 3 weeks. But then there's always weather, there's always different things, so you have to go out a lot. So there's a lot of driving, guys. Someone the other day got in their truck and took a picture of the miles because it's insane. But they drive a lot. And you have to go back and assess and make educated guesses as to when is the best. But viability you won't know until you get the test. Sometimes you can look at the guys look at it and say, oh, this seed looks really really good. That's what they say. I'm not sure how they measure that. They say, oh, the seed looks really good, and usually they're right. But yeah, we have to also test our seed, and we receive a report on viability and stuff.
I would jump in just 1 second here and say, in general, if it's hard, if the seed is hard, it's generally more viable than if it's soft, right? So you're trying to get like maximum seed hardness. And like you can pick a tomato when it's green and it'll ripen. There are some seeds that will ripen after being picked, but you have to know which species is which. And hopefully we can include that type of stuff in some of our propagation protocol work that we're doing with the CNPS.
Fantastic. And I saw that there was a question about that, and yes, I know that there was a major revision to CalScape, so I've put some of that information in the chat. So there was recently a webinar that was done. Thank you, Julia, for that answer. It's good to know that state CNPS is really supporting home growers and kind of recognizing that big things can also happen on a small scale too. So this is fantastic. Lots of kudos in here about your photos, Joshua. So yeah, thank you again for sharing those with us. That is very spectacular. I have a question here. You had mentioned collecting in the Knoxville's wildlife area. Has your collection practice been impacted by the 2020 LNU fire?
Well, I mean, I think a big reason why we're doing the collection is because of the fire. We're doing it because there's a particular contract. They're trying to kind of re-diversify the area that was impacted by the fire, and so they requested a collection contract with particular species that they're interested in, from a specific kind of area, and we do our best to provide them with the seed that they're looking for. But I don't know if Julia has something to say.
Oh yeah, no, that's exactly what I was going to say. They got a wildfire resilience grant, the CDFW. So the idea is, not that they're trying to plant this native habitat that's never going to burn again, because they know it's going to burn again, but to be sort of just stocking up on that seed bank again, so that hopefully when it comes through again, there will be, more diversity available for recovery.
Looks like I have a couple more questions. How many people work at Hedgerow Farms? And who are your typical customers? Are they local governments for dam removal? Are they real estate developers for offsetting development, for mitigation, orchard owners? Can you elaborate a little bit on who comes to you and says, I need thousands of pounds of seed?
Yeah, I mean, lots of people come to us and say we need 5 pounds of seed, and we're totally happy to help those people too. But yeah, our biggest customers are state agencies, like Caltrans is a big one when they do road cuts, erosion control mixes we do. We also do pollinator mixes for orchards. We do solar developers are really interested in incorporating natives in their plantings. Yeah, it's really everything. Our customers are from, you know, the small home gardeners to these huge BLM contracts. One of the things that's really exciting is we have launched a retail website in partnership with a company called Nature's Seed. It's in progress. It's not perfect. We're working on it. It's hard to work with a different company that doesn't have the same, you know, experience that we have, but hang tight because we want to be able to get all this seed out in packets as well as, you know, large sacks too. So keep posted. By the fall. Hopefully you'll be able to purchase Hedgerow Farms packaged seed envelopes.
I think that's awesome, Julia and Joshua, that Hedgerow is not just thinking about, you know, the big you know, Caltrans needs, but also like really supporting the homegrown effort. And that's something that you know, is really important to our membership. I have one more question for you, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Actually, there's two. It is 8 o'clock. What about weed control methods? How do you control weeds in your fields?
I'll take this one first, Joshua, and you can add in if you want. So the best part about growing in row cropping systems is we can cultivate, right? So, well, actually, first thing is we're constantly switching between grasses and forbs. And so it's way easier just to spot and to pull out a forb from a grass field or a grass from a forb field. So if you keep switching it off, your weeds are way easier to manage. So that's number one. Number two, since they're row crops, we can actually drive cultivators down the rows and they just kind of till a little bit in between the rows. So that's another one. We hand weed. They call them roguing crews, and that's what you saw those beautiful photos of Joshua Joshua took in the Lysenia field, just hand pulling. And then occasionally when we need to, we do use herbicides. You know, we're very conscious of when we spray with pollinators, what we spray. You know, I personally think, like, you know, in agricultural contexts, herbicides are can be necessary. And they're not sort of the blunt tool that they used to be. We have very selective herbicides. So again, we try everything we can not to, but it is something we have to do sometimes, which is why you have to email me first if you're going to go running through the fields, just in case we had to spray that day. So
really important. Okay, it looks like I've got one last question for you. Does Hedgerow Farms grow bulbs or bulb seed? As you're probably aware, some California natives are available from big national bulb sellers, but those are probably not local ecotypes.
yeah, we tried Blue Dicks a few years back and it was really hard. So no, we don't. At scaling up, like, that's something that I think a smaller nursery or seed company could do, but just at the scale we're doing, not really. The closest thing we come to bulbs are those rhizomes of the showy milkweed. And even those, we're not like shipping those places. You have to come pick them up yourself. There's only a window of time that they're available. And so yeah, it's just a totally different set of requirements for harvesting and preserving and all of those things. So unfortunately, no.
Okay, well, with that, that concludes our questions for the evening. Julia, Joshua, I just want to say thank you for bringing this presentation to the Sacramento Valley Chapter CNPS. It was just a joy to host you tonight. It's wonderful to see just the beauty that you're growing in the plots, and beyond that, you know, there is such a need for restoration. As you had mentioned, 30 by 30, we do have some very aggressive goals as a state, and maintaining that genetic diversity is so important. And, you know, with the values and principles that Hedgerow is incorporating into their cultivation practice, I just want to say thank you for the work that you're doing.
Thank you for the work that CNPS is doing. We wouldn't be able to do it without you all. So
Yeah, thank you for having us.
All right.
Awesome. Well, have a good night, everyone, and thank you again, Joshua and Julia.
Good
All
night.
right, we'll see you on in May for it's going to be May 8th for the chapter meeting. So we'll see you next month, folks. All right, have a good night.